Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to go over my best slalom session that I had in my 2-month in Tarifa and analyze this session. I actually went quite fast, hitting a top speed on my slalom gear of over 38 knots. So I'm going to go over my gear, my trim and the technique that I'm using in this session to achieve those speeds. Let's roll the drone footage and start the video. Okay, so actually this session was not in Tarifa, as Tarifa has been super windy this winter, which is fun, but sometimes I also want to have a fun flat water session. So this day I drove over to Cadiz, where there is some flat water kind of lagoons or like inland bays, where you have quite flat conditions, as you can see here on the video. And this spot had very small chop and the wind was around 20 to 35 knots in this session. So yeah, really ideal if you just want to have fun on small to medium slalom gear. And I actually tested several different setups this day, especially I tested several different boards with fins, and I'm going to go over that. But right here on the drone video that you see right now, I'm on the 97 liter board with a 6.8 fin and a 29 centimeter fin, which is actually quite small. Usually I'm using a 32, but we'll get into that as well. As you can see, I also managed to overlay the speeds in this video in the bottom right corner. So I think this helps while analyzing if you can see the live speeds. So this spot I actually went to with low tide because it's a bay, but it's connected to the sea. And this actually helped to reduce the chop because the water was not so deep. So the chop, I would say here, was around 20 to 40 centimeters, so quite small. So the first thing to go fast if you arrive to any spot, there's usually a direction or tack that you go that is a little bit better or faster than the other one. And why is that? Usually the wind and the wave directions are not exactly the same. Usually there is one direction that works a bit better because the chop is moving into a little bit of a different direction than the wind is. And this creates the opportunity to go a little bit downwind on one tack but still go parallel to the waves. What you want to do to go fast is to basically keep the board and sail as steady as possible so that you can put constant pressure on the fin and just keep accelerating. So this day the better tack is the starboard tack that I'm on right here, and you can see that I can go slightly downwind but still not bump so much over the waves. You can see how I'm just accelerating and the board and sail really are not moving too much. I keep my front leg very straight and put pressure onto the fin with my back leg. And what this does is it also keeps the gear very steady. So yeah, now I'm slowly picking up speed and going 30 knots and faster. And what I'm doing to slowly gain the speed, I'm not going fully downwind. I'm just building up the speed basically on a half wind course, going parallel to the waves here and go as fast as possible, which here is around 31, 32 knots. And then I put maximum pressure on my front leg, keep it very straight, and also put some pressure on my back leg onto the fin, because putting pressure onto the fin will help lift the board a little bit and make the board more free and give less resistance. Yeah, then I'm going into the jibe here. And let's play that jibe again in slow motion. As you can see, going downwind here onto the jibe, you have this small chop. And I'm going quite fast into the jibe with more than 30 knots. So what I want to do then is to go really down into my knees to kind of absorb the chop. The further you go down into your knees, your legs kind of act like a spring. If you were to keep your legs very straight, the board would hit the waves really hard. And every wave you hit will slow down the board. So as you go down into your knees, the legs work more or less like a spring and the board will not hit the waves with full force. So you keep more speed going over the waves. So yeah, now I'm going on to port tack, and on this tack I basically tried to go upwind the whole time again. And yeah, beautiful drone shots here. And what I realized this year on the sails, of course I'm using 0.7 sails, the sails have been reworked so that they work a bit better on like an upwind and like square course. The 0.7 sails have always been extremely good if you go fully downwind. They give a lot of power and you can go really fast. But in the previous years, maybe we were lacking a little bit in going upwind with the sails or like on a reach. And this year I feel I have a lot more speed on the reach, whereas the years before I felt that the sail felt like a little bit heavy maybe on an upwind or square reach. So it's kind of interesting that the sails made this huge of a progress, like 13, 14 years into the sail development. And yeah, now I'm going not upwind but square, and you can see the speeds immediately pick up, and I'm going around 28 to 29 knots here. And I'm going to pause the video for a second because I was using here a 29 centimeter fin, which for me is really small on this setup. Usually on the 97 board I'm using a 32 fin if I'm using a 7.0 sail. Then if I'm using the 6.0 sail I can go down to like 30 centimeters. but I thought I'd just give it a try as the conditions were so flat and nice, and actually I was super surprised that it was working as well as it did. Maybe it was because of the flat conditions, but the fin gave a lot of lift. Even going upwind was not a problem, but I think this is also because the sails have improved in going upwind this year. They have, I think, a little less area on the top, so they were cut a little bit, and this, I think, is also giving less drag sideways, and therefore you can use smaller fins, which in turn is faster again. So it's the first time I tried it with this sail size on this board. I know it works with a 6.0, but I've never tried it with a 6.8, so pretty surprising that it was still this easy to go upwind. Let's roll the video again. So now I'm going into the jibe on this tack, and on this side the wind was usually a bit patchy, so I need to pump a little bit out of the jibe here until I hit the gust again. Yeah, you can see there's also a winger right there, so there are some people out on the spot. There was some slalom windsurfers, a lot of wingers, like on most spots these days. And I actually tried basically all the medium small boards from Futurefly that day. So here I'm on the 97, but I also was using in the first hour of the session the 117 dark horse, and then I was using for a few runs the 107 dark horse. And one thing that I found out for myself is that even if the wind is there to go smaller, that smaller boards are not necessarily always faster. In general, this assessment is kind of true, but what you also have to keep in mind, certain conditions favor different boards. Certain boards are better in certain kind of wave conditions and certain kinds of chop. So this day I was actually really surprised of the 107. I went with this board the fastest this day. I hit 38.1 knots, whereas in the first hour with the 117 I hit 35.8 knots, and with the 97, so the smallest board, I hit 36.7 knots. So I was almost going 1.5 knots faster with a bigger board, even though the small board was powered. Why is that? Maybe partly it's due because I hit the best gust with the 107. I'm going to play some footage here of the 107 where Mario's on the board, not me. But I think what it really comes down to is that, as you can see in this last part of the downwind run, you were crossing a little bit these waves. And sometimes as you're going over the back of these small chops or waves, it helps to have a little bit bigger board with a little bit bigger tail, because then the board is not digging so much into each piece of chop, but kind of more hovering above it. That's also the reason why speedboards are not going infinitely smaller. There's like a limit at like 40 centimeters of width, because if you make it any narrower, then the board is sinking too much into the water, and you don't want that. So I think for this reason, the 107 was the fastest board of the day. And yeah, it was pretty fun to play around with the board sizes that day and compare them to each other. The 117 I felt was a bit too big for the day with 20 to 35 knots, and the 107 was kind of in the sweet spot for the day. But even though the 107 was the fastest that day, I feel like the 97 was easier to get fast, because the 107 obviously is a bit wider, so you need to put more pressure onto the rails to really control that board. And the 97 was kind of easy to get to like 35 knots every run. So yeah, now I'm entering the speed run again, but right here I'm not fully downwind yet. I'm actually looking more at kind of the wave direction and find a good line in between the waves so that the board is not moving too much. Now I'm entering a little bit of a lull, so I'm pointing the board a bit more upwind, because this helps you keep the speed if you're entering a lull. And you don't want to lose so much speed. You don't want to just pressure on downwind. You actually want to go a little bit upwind again, because this will give you more apparent wind in your sail. And then as the next gust hits, I'm going downwind again. And by doing this little maneuver of pointing a bit upwind before the gust, I could make another slingshot into the next gust and really accelerate. All right, let's look at this jibe. And I can see a little mistake in this jibe. I don't know if you spotted it, so let's play it again with a bit of slow motion. I see that I was entering a little bit of a wind hole going downwind here out of the gust that I went to into the slingshot. I kind of have to push the sail around, and what happens now when I do the foot shift is that I go for like half a second or 1 second, I put pressure onto the opposite rail. So instead of making a smooth turn, I actually go into the wrong direction for like half a second there, which obviously is costing me speed and time. And from looking at this video, I think that my right foot was not standing exactly on the center line, or I was putting too much weight onto my toes instead of my heels. So this way I dug the wrong rail into the water and turned for a little bit into the wrong direction. Obviously here, as it's so flat and kind of easy to ride, I managed to just put pressure on the opposite rail again and keep going and still make a nice planing jibe. But it's slowing me down a bit, and in a racing situation, this would be like the knot or two that I'm missing going out of the jibe again. So when it comes to finding the trim on the board, you kind of want the board to be flat, but have the least amount of drag possible. And this also comes down to the conditions that you're in. Here in relatively flat water, you can ride the board relatively flat, meaning that the nose is not pointing up too much, but that only like the last centimeters of the tail of the board are touching the water. And what the settings you can play around with for this are your mast base position. The further you put that to the front, the more flat your board will ride, and the further you put this back, the more the nose of the board will lift up. So if you have like very nasty big chop, you want the nose of the board actually to lift up a little bit more so that you're not crashing with the nose into the waves. And if you have more flat conditions here, you can put the mast base a little bit forward to ride the board a bit more flat. The other thing that you can play around with is the boom height, which also will increase or decrease the lift and how much the nose of your board is rising. And I actually like to have a lot of lift from the sail, so I ride the boom relatively high, and then I also like to use short harness lines. The shorter your harness lines, the more lift and the more free your board will ride. Here in these conditions I can ride the harness lines quite short, so I think I'm using around 28 inches. Obviously I'm using variable harness lines, so I cannot tell you exactly. But I would advise to use as short harness lines as you can manage. As soon as you feel that your board starts tail walking and that you cannot keep the board flat on the water and controlled, then you want to make your harness lines a little bit longer to give you that control edge again. But I'm a rider that likes to use relatively short harness lines and get a lot of lift from the sail. And something that really helped me to go faster is that you don't want to force anything. You kind of want to have the feeling that your sail is pulling you and pulling you downwind, instead of if you're having to work a lot with your hands and it feels forced, then you will not go as fast. Usually for me, the fastest runs are the ones where it all feels super easy. The sail is just pulling me downwind. Of course, I'm locked in, I have body tension, but I don't need to move around a whole lot, because every little movement will kill a little bit of your speed. Because as I've said before, you want the gear to stay as steady as possible. So yeah, this was a really beautiful session, and as I'm heading in, it kind of ended a little bit in, I would not say disaster, but it ended kind of unfortunate, because on this spot there were a lot of fisher boats anchored to the ground where you went in and out, and then with this low tide you're kind of sailing in between the buoys, and I should have just not gone in planing, as I knew there were a lot of ropes attached to these buoys. I thought I kept a lot of distance from all of them. But unfortunately, I pulled one of the ropes with my fin and then went over the handlebar, over the boom, and crashed somehow into the sail. The sail is not broken, but I made a nasty dent in it, and it was actually the first time that I was using this fin. So not the best end to the session and kind of frustrating, but yeah, not the end of the world. I hope you enjoyed this kind of video where I'm just talking over this beautiful session that I had. If you did, I would appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. We're very close to 10,000 subscribers now, which is crazy. I would not have thought a few years ago that I would reach this. So thanks to all of you guys who are subscribed to the channel. Thanks to my Patreons and sponsors, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye.